Hi everybody. So in the previous class, I have given some problems. I think two problems. Now, we are going to prove one important theorem, that is so called Ferraro's law of isorotation. Ferraro's law of isorotation. So what it states? It states that the angular velocity of a perfectly conducting fluid rotating steadily about its axis of symmetry is constant along the magnetic field lines. Okay, so we have to prove the angular velocity must be along the magnetic field lines. Yavaga, the angular velocity of the perfectly conducting fluid rotating steadily means time independent, okay, about its axis of symmetry is constant along magnetic field lines. So omega is constant along magnetic field lines. It must be along magnetic field lines. We have to show it is along magnetic field lines and it must be constant. To prove it is constant, we have to show the derivative must be 0. So I am taking the z-axis, it is rotating about, so it is taken as axis of symmetry, right? So it must be the r, unit normal r, right? Unit normal r, and so it is theta angle, it must be along the, direction angle theta, and the fluid is rotating about its axis with some angular velocity omega, and it's a point, so p of r theta z, right? So now we have taken OZ be the axis of symmetry, so of a perfectly conducting fluid rotating about its axis, right? That is, z axis with angular velocity omega. So this is the point on the fluid where r theta z are cylindrical polar coordinate system, right? So polar coordinates, right? So here the axis is z axis. So now we have taken the fluid is rotating along the axis z, so with angular velocity omega. Now, so the condition is the fluid is steady, okay, the flow is steady, right? So and the fluid is of perfectly conducting. Perfectly conducting means, the conductivity parameter tends to infinity, right? So that's why your magnetic permeability, nu m becomes 0. Your nu m becomes 0 because nu m is equal to 1 divided by sigma into, r and 10 ತಗೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀವಲ್ವಾ. So then that's why, as sigma tends to perfectly conducting means sigma tends to infinity, that's why nu m becomes 0. Now as we know, the magnetic induction equation for a perfectly conducting fluid as del B by del T is equal to del cross Q cross B. Is it right? Del cross Q cross B. One more term, nu m into del square something, that becomes 0 because nu m tends to 0. That's why simply the magnetic induction equation becomes like this, right? Now, since the flow is steady, we have taken the flow is steady, that's why this term tends to 0. Simply you are getting del cross Q cross B is equal to 0. Call this equation as some 1, right? Del cross B cross, del cross Q cross B is equal to 0. So they have given that the motion of the fluid is only due to rotation, okay? So that's why your Q, velocity must be equal to angular velocity. Rotation means it depends on theta. That's why r into omega into theta. Unit vector theta cap, right? So the velocity is given by r into omega into theta cap. Now I am going to take the magnetic field, applied magnetic field as, Br into r comma z into r cap, Br of r comma z into r cap plus Bz of r comma z into k cap. Means there will be no magnetic field along theta direction, right? So we have taken only along r direction as well as k direction, and Br and Bz both are functions of only r and z, right? Therefore, so now you have to find curl of q cross b. To find this, first you have to find what is q cross b. Q cross b is equal to, so 1 by r into, the cross product in polar coordinate system, that is given by 1 by r into r cap into, r cap theta cap k cap del by del r. So there will be no theta, del by del z, right? So, and the components are given by, so r into omega into br, r is, there will be, so we have to take only q and this one b. Q cross b is equal to, so this is r theta k, right? So by here component of qr, r into omega, this is 0, only one component with theta, and b components are given by this one br and bz only, there will be no theta component. By expanding this, you are going to get r into omega into bz into r cap minus r into omega into bz into k cap, right? So by expanding, look here, so r into this one, right? Theta, there will be, so 0 and 0, and k 0 minus of this will become minus. Now you can find curl of q cross b. Curl of q cross b is equal to, so 1 by r into, because of the operator, so defined with polar coordinate system, 1 by r into r theta k, and this is del by del r, theta component is 0, del by del z, right? So, and the components of q cross b. Q cross b components are given by these two, that is r omega bz 0, r minus r omega bz. This is br. So one is br. So look here, r into this is bz, correct? K into this is br, right? So this is br. Okay. So now by expanding this, you are going to get, so simply, so look here, r into this is 0, this is 0, minus theta into minus theta cap into this one. So minus of this and minus of this, that's why again it will become plus del by del r of r omega br plus del by del z of r omega bz, r omega bz. Okay. So by expanding this or simplifying this, you are going to get, or directly you can substitute here in the given equation. So it must be equal to 0. That's why you can write it as 0 into theta cap, 0 into theta cap, because this quantity, this must be equal to 0. That's why you can write it as 0 into theta cap. So by comparing the coefficients of theta cap, you are going to get del by del r of r omega br plus del by del z of r omega bz must be equal to 0. Must be equal to 0, right? By expanding this, you are going to get, ನಾನು ಒಮೆಗನ್ ಒಂದನ್ನೇ ಒಂದು ಕಾಂಪೊನೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋತೀನಿ, ಆರ್ ಬಿ ಆರ್, ಸಿಮಿಲರ್ಲಿ ಆರ್ ಬಿ ಝಡ್ ಇನ್ನು ಅವನ್ನ ಒಂದು ಕಾಂಪೊನೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋತೀನಿ. ಸೊ ದೆನ್ ಬೈ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಯಾಂಡಿಂಗ್ ದಿಸ್, ಯು ಆರ್ ಗೋಯಿಂಗ್ ಟು ಗೆಟ್ ಆರ್ ಬಿ ಆರ್ ಇಂಟು del omega by del r plus omega into del by del r of r br plus similarly here r bz into del omega by del z plus so omega into del by del z of r bz must be equal to 0. Must be equal to 0. Now, so by separating the terms, you are going to get by this and by this you can take, so omega outside, omega into del by del r of r br plus so del by del z of r bz plus remaining term is plus this one and this one. So from these two terms you can take R outside, R into Br into del omega by del R plus Bz into del omega by del Z. Dz into del omega by del Z must be equal to 0. Now divide throughout the equation by R, then this will become, so it implies omega by R into del by del R of R Br plus del by del Z of R Bz plus R get cancelled, simply Br into del omega by del R plus Bz into del omega by del Z is equal to 0. Now look here, so you can write this as, you can write this term, these two terms as, by taking R outside, simply divergence of B ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಡೈವರ್ಜೆನ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಬಿ, ಒಮೆಗಾ ಹೊರಗಡೆ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಒಂದ್ಸಲ ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡಿ ನೋಡಿ. ಡೈವರ್ಜೆನ್ಸ್ ಅಂದರೆ ನಿಮಗೆ ರಿಲೇಷನ್ ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆ. ಸೊ ಅಂಡ್ ದೆನ್, ಸೊ ಯು ನೋ ವಾಟ್ ಯು ಮೀನ್ ಬೈ ಬಿ. ಬಿ ಅಂದರೆ ರಿಲೇಷನ್ ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆ. ದೆನ್ ಚೆಕ್ ಇಟ್, ಯು ಆರ್ ಗೋಯಿಂಗ್ ಟು ಗೆಟ್, ಸೊ del dot b ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ರೈಟ್ ಇಟ್ ಆಸ್ ಒಮೆಗಾ ಇಂಟು del dot b ಪ್ಲಸ್ ಈ ಟರ್ಮ್ ಏನು ಬರಿಬೋದು ನೀವು, ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ರೈಟ್ ಇಟ್ ಆಸ್ ಬಿ ಆರ್ ಇಂಟು ಡೆಲ್ ಬೈ ಡೆಲ್ ಆರ್ ಪ್ಲಸ್ ಬಿ ಝಡ್ ಇಂಟು ಡೆಲ್ ಬೈ ಡೆಲ್ ಝಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಒಮೆಗಾ ಅಂತ ಬರಿಬೋದು. ದಿಸ್ ಕ್ವಾಂಟಿಟಿ ಇಸ್ ಈಕ್ವಲ್ ಟು 0. ಇದನ್ನ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ ಹೆಂಗೆ ಕಾಣ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಲೈಕ್ ಬಿ ಡಾಟ್ ಡೆಲ್ ತರ ಕಾಣ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಸೊ ಇಟ್ ಲುಕ್ ಲೈಕ್ಸ್ b dot del of omega. That's why these two terms can be written as simply ಏನು ಬಂತು ನಿಮಗೆ, omega into divergence of b, okay, plus b dot, so del of omega must be equal to ಏನು 0. So ಇಲ್ಲಿ del dot b is equal to 0. Why? Because of solenoidal property, right? Solenoidal property ಏನು ಹೇಳುತ್ತೆ, so del dot b is equal to 0. That's why this quantity must be equal to 0 plus b dot del of omega is equal to b to 0. b dot del of omega is equal to 0. What it says? This says, right, there is no variation in angular velocity. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ equal to 0 ಬಂತಲ್ಲ, ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಡೆರಿವೇಟಿವ್ ನ ಒಮೆಗಾಗೆ ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ದಟ್ ಕ್ವಾಂಟಿಟಿ ಈಸ್ 0 ಅಂತ ಬಂತು ಅಂದ್ರೆ, ಸೊ ಒಮೆಗಾ ಮಸ್ಟ್ ಬಿ ದ ಆಂಗ್ಯುಲರ್ ವೆಲಾಸಿಟಿ. ಹಾಗಾದ್ರೆ ಏನ್ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ, ಸೊ ದೇರ್ ಇಸ್ ನೋ ವೇರಿಯೇಷನ್ ಇನ್ ಆಂಗ್ಯುಲರ್ ವೆಲಾಸಿಟಿ. ಸೊ ಅಲಾಂಗ್ ದಿ ಮ್ಯಾಗ್ನೆಟಿಕ್ ಫೀಲ್ಡ್ ಲೈನ್ಸ್, ಅಲಾಂಗ್ ದಿ ಮ್ಯಾಗ್ನೆಟಿಕ್ ಫೀಲ್ಡ್ ಲೈನ್ಸ್, ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ದ ಆಂಗ್ಯುಲರ್ ವೆಲಾಸಿಟಿ ಈಸ್ ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟೆಂಟ್. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನೋ ವೇರಿಯೇಷನ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ವಾಟ್ ಇಟ್ ಮೀನ್ಸ್, ಇಟ್ ಮೀನ್ಸ್ ಸೊ ಆಂಗ್ಯುಲರ್ ವೆಲಾಸಿಟಿ ಈಸ್ ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟೆಂಟ್. ಅದರ್ ವರ್ಡ್ಸ್ ಹೆಂಗೆ ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು ಇದನ್ನ, ದ ಫ್ಲೂಯಿಡ್, so at all points on a magnetic field line rotate about its axis at a constant angular velocity. ಏನಾಗ್ತಿರುತ್ತೆ, ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಆಂಗ್ಯುಲರ್ ವೆಲಾಸಿಟಿ ಇಂದ ಮೂವ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ, ರೈಟ್. ಸೊ ದಿಸ್ ಈಸ್ ಅಬೌಟ್, ಸೊ ಯುವರ್ ಐ ಮೀನ್ Ferraro's law of isorotation. ಸೊ ಬೈ ದಿಸ್ ನಾನೇನು ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ, ಇವತ್ತು ಇದನ್ನ ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಇದ್ರ ಕನ್ಸರ್ನ್ಡು ಒಂದೆರಡು ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಸೊ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಇಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಟೇಕ್ ಸೊ ಲಿಟಲ್ ಮೋರ್ ಟೈಮ್. That's why I'm going to stop here, right? So take care. Thank you.